Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Almost Dropouts podcast. I'm your host, Daivik, and today I have Nick. Nick, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone. Yeah, my name's Nick. I am a kind of current student at the University of Waterloo, but I'm taking a little bit of break from school to work on a startup called Superpowered. And yeah, I've previously done internships at Viva, BlackBerry, Intuit. I'm currently working more as a designer, but I've done work before as a product manager as well as a software developer. So
So I thought, I saw that Nick was working on Superpowered, which is, the startup that he's working on with a couple friends, and so I thought it'd be really interesting to, bring him on the podcast to talk about that. So I guess, starting off, what is Superpowered, Nick?
yeah, so Superpowered, we are a calendar app in your menu bar. So what that does is it allows you to see your daily schedule and join meetings without having to go to your calendar. So we
Right.
find that a lot of times with people, me especially, right before a meeting starts, I have to go find my calendar. Usually it's not open. I have to open it on Chrome, open my Google Calendar, find the event, then click join meeting. It's a lot of things, especially since I'm always late too to meetings. So it's like
Yeah.
even more stressful. So yeah, we found that this was just a problem that we were having a lot of. Decided to make a app out of it or a product, and a lot of other people seem to be enjoying it and also finding it useful. So
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, I guess especially with all the online meetings everybody has booked. I know I know one of the most useful parts about I use Superpowered, and one of the most useful parts is just being able to see when the next meeting is without having to
mhm.
open my calendar app. That's great because you can sort of see when the time is, and then yeah, it's like one click away. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. I think for me, it sort of helps relieve a lot of the anxiety throughout the day when you're just working on your computer. You're like, oh, when's my next meeting? And it's nice to just be able to kind of see it, like, oh, it's in 2 hours around. So yeah.
Exactly. And I guess the inspiration behind it was just like, during the pandemic, I guess you must have especially seen that where people are running towards meetings. Or when did the idea really start?
Yeah, so a little bit of backstory. So this is definitely not the first idea that we were working on in relation to this whole startup. We
Mhm.
originally were working on something in the online video lecture delivery sort of space, and that was because we were doing online school at that time, and we found that the entire experience was less than ideal. So that's kind of why we decided to try that. For a lot of reasons, that didn't necessarily work out, and then we moved to something around helping again in the meeting space, but it was helping people take notes while they were sort of running a online call because it's a little difficult to do both at the same time.
Right.
But that also didn't work out for a couple of reasons. I can go over those later. But yeah, we kind of settled on this idea actually around beginning of January. We were just kind of looking around for a new idea to kind of work on for our startup. And this was just a problem that we were running into a lot because we had a lot of calls with people that we wanted to ask them about their problems and whatnot. And then I was missing a couple of calls, which is terrible. You should not do that. It's very
Right.
unprofessional. And I was just like, oh, I'm terrible at this. I need to know when my next call is. I need to make sure I join on time because, yeah. So I think that was just something where we just decided to one weekend just make something very small that just allowed you to join a meeting really easily as long as you connect to your
Right.
Google Calendar. And then it kind of just went from there. So yeah.
Wow. That was really quick though. You guys came up with this idea in January. That's a really quick turnaround to where it is right now.
Yeah. I think it was nice because at that time we were also really kind of frustrated with the whole process of trying to find a new idea because it can be really kind of disheartening to be like, oh, what about this? And then we try looking into it and it's like, oh, we're not going to do it for these reasons. So I think we were all kind of a little relieved that we had something to work on, that we found that a lot of people, and it was really nice because with this, it's like the main value that most people get of our app is just being able to join their meeting from a really easy location, right? And that was like
Right.
the only thing we had from the first day. And I think that because that was the main value add and we were able to deliver it so quickly and so easy to develop, that like from there on it was really easy for us to see like new iterations that like, oh, now let's make it so there's text in your menu bar that allows you to see when your next meeting is, and like these small little constant improvements. So just really easy, I think, to iterate on this product at the very beginning, which made it so it's really
Right.
easy for us to continually develop it. So
hmm And yeah, so I saw recently you guys got into Y Combinator with this product. So I was wondering what's that process been like, and how are they supporting you and stuff?
yeah, so I'm not as familiar with like the process of application because I think so a couple of my other co-founders took over that. But I can talk a little
Right.
bit more about the sort of Y Combinator experience like while you're inside, because it's also been a little weird since it's a remote sort of batch.
Right.
Usually you would be there in person, but with COVID and everything. So yeah, for us, what sort of why Combinator has been looking like from like a week to week is that they have sort of batch events on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which are talks that are hosted by um, different sort of companies that have been in YC before. So that might be like
Right.
Dropbox, Airbnb, like any other talks, and those are really helpful to sort of know a little bit more about experiences that previous founders have had in I think a lot of their experiences are really like sort of insightful in terms of a lot of the pitfalls that you might encounter as a first time founder, especially sort of
Right.
avoid a lot of those. So those talks have been really helpful, and also just ability to kind of everyone sits around, watches a talk, and we can talk about it afterwards too. And another
Right.
big thing that happens is there are group office hours. So we sort of a lot of the they're called, you kind of get put in a batch, right, of a bunch of different companies that are going through YC at the same time as you, and
Mhm.
then you get split into smaller sort of sections where you get to know a little bit more of like certain other companies that are like in your sort of group, I guess, because there's so
Right.
many companies in YC, there's no way you're going to be able to like get to know all of them. And with those groups, you're sort of able to develop a little bit closer relationships with other founders, able to talk to them about their company, get to know their companies too after a while, and like a lot of them are working on some really interesting stuff. So yeah, that's just been a really great experience to be able to talk to other companies that are like at similar stages as you. Some of them are maybe a little further ahead, some of them are a little bit more like
Right.
at different stages, but that's also been really helpful for YC. And yeah, and the final thing
Mhm.
is we all have partners that we work with that are sort of host office hours. So you're able to talk to them about any problems you might have, any questions around your company. And they're all like
Right.
super insightful, and they all have so much experience in working with startups and working at startups. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and I guess like one really great thing about that is, there's always a lot of growing pains for startups. So being matched with startups that have similar, that are at similar stages to you, you can learn from each other and not necessarily repeat each other's mistakes, or help each other out if something goes wrong.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's been one of the big parts too, is it's really amazing to see how much people are willing to help you out because they are in a similar position. They know how like stressful and yeah, how uncertain everything can feel and how like anything can make you feel so terrible when stuff goes wrong, right? So it's really great to have other
Yeah.
people who you're able to kind of like bounce that off of and see what they're doing to sort of, I guess, get through that. So
And do you think YC will it stay remote for a while, or do you think they plan to bring it in person?
I don't know honestly their plans for the future, but for this term at least, they're definitely going to be staying remote for the whole way through. I think.
Right.
Yeah, I honestly don't know too much about their future plans, but
But I assume like if you guys have the opportunity to go in person, you would probably go, or
yeah, that definitely would be nice. But yeah, safety is definitely first. So
yeah, yeah, of course.
yeah,
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah. And like alongside that, I know I saw you guys launch on Product Hunt. It was actually really interesting because I think you messaged me out of the blue, like
yeah,
do you want to try out Superpowered? But then I was like, I tried it out and stuff, and I was also like on Product Hunt around the same time, and I saw it like with a bunch of upvotes and stuff. I'm like, oh, this is the same thing Nick sent me. Yeah, this is crazy. And so like, yeah, how's the initial response been? And it seemed like it gained a lot of traction on Product Hunt. So you wanna talk about that as well?
yeah. So the launch was pretty crazy, and that was like the first time that I guess I've ever experienced a launch from that side and what that
Mhm.
entailed. So there's a lot of like I guess behind the scenes stuff that people do on Product Hunt to make sure that their product launches like works the best. So like there's optimal times to launch, right? There's optimal days of the week to launch. There's like a bunch of I guess strategy that goes into like making your launch go really well. So for example, we launched at midnight PST towards the
Okay.
beginning of the week because that's usually better for just having that like because they have like a bunch of those like sort of awards, right, like a product of the day and also product of the week, right?
Right.
So in order to kind of optimize your chances kind of getting those, then it's best to launch at specific times. And then when we did launch, yeah, it was pretty much just like we blasted like all of our social medias, all the previous groups that we were in. um, yeah, we went really back. Like I think some people went back as like high school groups they were in that like kind of
Wow.
related to tech, just like kind of
Yeah.
going all out because we really wanted to sort of get the product in front of as many people as possible to get as much feedback. And yeah,
Yeah.
it was really great to also see how many friends were like helping out a lot, like without us necessarily like prompting them to that level of like people tweeting about it. Um, so that was really nice to see. And it was also really great to see like a lot of people who we didn't know also leaving positive reviews because I think it's pretty easy to like get support I think from people that right, like people always want to see you
Yeah.
succeed that you're like friends with, right? But it's like another level when it's like a stranger who kind of it might have just like, as you mentioned, sort of been looking on Product Hunt and be like, oh, cool, this is an interesting app. Like, and then they try
Hmm.
it out and they actually do have a really positive experience. I think that speaks much more to me. So that definitely was really good. There was definitely also a couple of negative comments too, and that happens with any sort of when you get a little more publicity, I guess. But that was also interesting to deal with for the first time. But I feel like we handled it pretty well. We didn't try to engage too much, and there were
Yeah,
some like I guess valid criticisms. One being sort of around our pricing,
yeah,
which I think we were also very uncertain about at that time because none of us really have too much experience working with pricing. But yeah, I think having that sort of people calling that out was really good for us to sort of reflect a little bit more on knowing like, okay, like this is some feedback that people are giving us around like how they're benchmarking our product versus other ones. These are
yeah.
some potential other models that they are sort of suggesting. Like, I guess it doesn't really matter whether we take it necessarily, but like it's good to still have all that information and still know like our customers are thinking about our product. So yeah,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what's really important when you touch, like, your friends will usually, like, they might give you a little bit some critical comments, but they won't necessarily go like the full depth what you might need to understand, what's the next iteration for your product, and what's the next step. So definitely getting like public feedback where people might people won't hold back for the bet for the good or for the worse, can definitely be very helpful.
yeah,
And it seems like, yeah, that's definitely great. Like I know on Product Hunt you got a bunch of comments talking about it, so that was really cool to see.
yeah.
Um, it really popped out. Like, that's actually really interesting. That you launched it, and like, I understand what you get. I guess I understand what you guys were doing here there, because Product Hunt has like product of the week and product of the day.
Yeah,
So I guess you get to capitalize on both of those, doing it earlier in the week,
yeah,
late at night.
for sure. And there was a lot of like hiccups before that too. I remember that day I was running on like maybe like 2 hours of sleep because the day before, what happened was I'm not the like so I'm primarily working on like the design side
Right,
for Superpower as long as product, but I'm not the best at branding. And before our website, like I just didn't spend enough time on branding because there's so many other things to do. But we needed to kind of get like a good website going for Product Hunt, right? Because a
right.
lot of people would be going to it. So then I worked on like a first iteration of the website, and oh my gosh, like I look back on it now, and it's such a struggle. Like I cannot believe that I even like thought that that was something that I'd put out, but like it was so bad, and like I think the rest of my team, they're really nice, but like I think they also realized it was not the best, and I agree with them. But they were just
Yeah,
like I don't really know what we can do with this. And then so what happened was I was just like kind of like lost for it. So then I called up another friend who does way more work in branding, and he gave me a lot of really good advice to kind of like get me back down to the fundamentals. Like, okay, branding first and foremost is about consistency. Like, you don't stop
right.
with all these random things. Like, stop with the draft shot, stop with the transparency. Just like pick one thing and just stick with it, and then like just have a brand that is very consistently communicating something to the audience, and that will work. I'm like, okay. So I took that, I redid our entire landing page like that entire night before our thing. So that was before our launch, and then I felt bad for engineering because they had to like code it all back up too the day
Oh
before, which was
man.
also super stressful for them. So yeah, and then that's when we went into the launch, and the launch you had to stay up till midnight and go through all the night pretty much. So yeah, that was just not a great time. But I'm glad that I did the rebrand before we launched because oh my god, if we launched with that branding, I would have been so embarrassed. But anyways,
Yeah. No, especially like, that initial impression that you make with your brand is so important. So I think a
yeah,
lot of people discredit how much work goes into like into the biggest brands in the world, or just any form of branding, and how important it is. So it's definitely great that your friend came in, and
yeah,
helped you out there, because I think it looks great. Like obviously the UI and stuff does too, but I think the branding surrounding Superpowered looks, it does convey that tone, right? Like that
hmm
tone of being clean and streamlined, um and not necessarily like just trying to fit into your day, not necessarily being a clunky part to add,
yeah.
if that makes sense. So definitely that's that's great. I mean, there's so much that goes behind a launch. So these are the type of stories you won't necessarily hear, right? You'll just see the
hmm
Product Hunt page, but you won't know that the night before you were staying up all night, like, making those designs and then sending it to engineering to code. That's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. That was pretty crazy. Yeah,
But I guess, like with any startup, of course, there's a lot of challenges, and so you guys, first of all, it's crazy that you guys just started in January, because like it's a proper like fully, at least when I was using, like proper fully functioning product. So it's really impressive that it's that well done, only in like March. But What have been some challenges like working on Superpowered?
Yeah, so I think at the beginning, it's very clear like what you need to do, right? Because at the very beginning, you just need to make a product, right, that people will hopefully want to use, right? And that's like I guess YC's mantra of like make something people want, right? And it's like pretty clear,
Yeah,
right? Like, oh, that sounds super easy. But I think like as time goes on, there's so many extra things that kind of get like added to what makes that happen. So I think for us, for example, at the very beginning, when I was just working on designs for the product, I'm like, okay, super easy. I have some ideas as to what problems I think I would need to solve, right? And I can make designs for that, and then we can code it up, and then people use it. And it seems like people have the same product as or same problem as us, right? But then
right,
as your product gets bigger, and like for example, once we launch, we have to think about things like, okay, how are we going to monetize, right? And that's like a big one. Like, how do we know that we're delivering enough value? And then with that comes a lot of feedback from users, right? Because they want to see certain things for the product. And we're like, okay, then how are we going to set up sort of infrastructure for managing feedback? Because at the beginning, what we ended up doing was we had like an in-app feedback button and a little chat thing where they could like give us feedback and just be going straight to our Slack, like a Slack channel, right?
right,
And that quickly did not scale at all. Where it's just like now we had so many messages coming in like every day, and then like the way that we would like manage and triage them was we just like reply in a thread, just be like, I'm emailing this person, right? And then it was like no one knew what was going on, like no one was getting CC'd. It was just like kind of like everyone just like a free for all, right? And that just
right,
like we're like, oh my gosh, this is not going to work. Like we were getting a lot of, especially during launch, we got so many feedback requests that was just like so hard to keep track of what was going on. So then
right,
that became a big thing that we need to sort of figure out. And we came up with a new feedback system that allowed me to sort of be able to, like, we use Front now, and that sort of is like a team inbox manager thing. We have everything sent to like a one email, and then we all triage and like we assign people, like, yeah, it's like, now a thing, right? But then
yeah,
now
yeah,
that's like something I have to worry about. It's like, okay, how am I going to make sure that I'm responding appropriately to customer requests, right? And also now that more people use it, we're starting to encounter more like weird bugs that we've like never seen before, and we're like, how is that happening? Or like some
right,
people are using like a German keyboard, for example, and then in a German keyboard, for example, the Y key and the Z key are switched because in German Y is used much less frequently than Z is, right? But then
right,
our keyboard shortcut is Command Y, so for them it actually maps over to Command Z because of the like the location, so it doesn't work at all for them. So then someone asks us like, "Yo, can we have a different option? Like this doesn't work at all for me." And we're like, oh crap, like this, I guess there's a lot more things that we have to consider. And then on top of that too, like now we're thinking about like, okay, it's not just is our product valuable, but it's also thinking about like, oh, how can we perhaps grow like our product in terms of letting more and more people use it, right?
right,
So that's another thing that's kind of taking over some of time. So I think as time goes on, one thing that I think I'm sort of trying to figure out the balance between is how do I stay like kind of true to making sure that I'm still working on the initial problem of making a product that people love, but also spending enough time to address all these other like sort of challenges or things that need to be addressed as well, such as feedback
right.
from users, growth, yeah, and just like how do we still like I guess keep that because it can be super easy to get lost in all that stuff and kind of just neglect the first and most important thing, which is just making your product better and better every week, right? So
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, there's so many edge cases, like even in like such a relatively simple app, right? There's so many edge cases you have to think about.
yeah,
Um, and
yeah,
yeah, that German one, I never even imagined that would actually be an issue.
yeah.
So that's definitely like super interesting. I think having those scalable systems in place before is it you don't I guess you don't necessarily know that, okay, like these are this won't be necessarily be scalable, or honestly I guess in your guys' case, like I assume you guys didn't think it was going to go like this, it was going to grow this fast.
Hmm.
but
Yeah. And that's another really hard trade-off that you kind of mentioned is like figuring out when it's a good time to make something more scalable and like have like a more robust like framework or process around something versus just doing something like very quickly, right? Because I
right,
think especially when things are moving really quickly, you have to always make that decision because it's always an opportunity cost where it's like, yeah, you could spend like, I don't know, 2 hours here or 4 hours here, like making my design system more robust, but that's like 4 less hours on working on like a feature that needs to go out tomorrow. Right. So
right,
I think that it's a really hard trade-off because it feels bad too to do something that doesn't scale very well. Like if like that Slack channel just felt bad, but like it worked because we only needed to like we didn't need to get set up with Front, which took like a day or 2 or 3 days to like finally figure out a system that worked for us, right?
right,
With
right,
that, and we also looked at a bunch of different options before settling on that one. It's like, yeah, we need to get feedback for our launch. We had to finish our landing page and all this other stuff. We just need to get something out there, right?
yeah,
So Yeah, so it kind of feels bad to do something that doesn't scale like that, but it also I think is pretty necessary, and also it's nice to be able to also see like later on what your problems really are, because for us like we realized that the problem with the feedback channel was like, hey, we need to have a better like sort of transparency, but like email does work for us. We like emailing. That's like a good sort of
Right.
response time for us. So then we decided not to do something like intercom, which is much more involved in terms of like the intercom is that little chat bubble you see on the right, on bottom right
Mhm.
for a lot of places. Like we're like, okay, we decided not to do that because it's like that doesn't work for our specific problem, which is just transparency, and like just thought that was way too much. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think, one of the really nice things right now is that there's so many startups addressing these issues, right? Like even when you had this issue with your feedback, you were able to find a quick tool online, so you can at least have that like a pipeline going up, feedback pipeline going up. So I think that's definitely really helpful as well.
Yeah, there we use too many SaaS tools. Like we go through the our expenses, and I'm just like, we have
Right.
so many, and like we have, and just like our account management too. It's like, yeah, everything's a SaaS tool nowadays. And as you mentioned, it does help a lot in terms of moving quicker to have these pre-built solutions. But I think
Right.
you also have to be careful, because sometimes when you use too many, it actually kind of adds like additional debt in its own way, because like whenever you have a lot of platforms to manage, it always becomes like more and more on you to sort of figure out how to make sure they all still work for you. So, for example, for
Right.
emails, we use currently SendGrid as well as Mailchimp, because SendGrid is better for sending out like more automated emails that are more connected to in our product. But like Mailchimp is better
Right.
for like email campaigns, kind of. But like for me, I'm like, I really don't want to check these two and like have to figure out how to do email templates for both of them. I'm just like, so I'm thinking right now of just like kind of consolidating it to one, because yeah, maybe like Mailchimp is
Right.
slightly better at this, but like for me, it's just too much additional effort to have to maintain both of them. So
And then it's
yeah,
two additional expenses too, right? Like you have to maintain both services while you
yeah,
would hope that you could just make it into one. So that makes
yeah.
sense.
So I think you got to be really deliberate when you're coming to like picking SaaS tools that like you really think are working well for you. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, at least I know a lot of SaaS tools are moving to a pay as you go model too. So at least it's not like a base subscription that you have to pay that every time. You can sort of scale. You can
mhm.
scale your expenses according to your product as well.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
uh, but yeah, no, that's super cool, man. Definitely like I really look forward to seeing the future of the product. And so I guess sort of wrap up here.
Mhm.
What do you think your next steps are, and what do you think the future holds for Superpowered?
Yeah. So for us, we want to sort of see where our product direction goes, because that still is a little, I think, up in the air for us. Like we really want to understand where like the future vision of our company is in terms of like what our 10-year goal is, or like how do we reach sort of one thing they mentioned in YC is like a little exercise to do is like what do you like think your $1 billion company looks like, and how do you like plan on getting there, right? And obviously like
Right.
a lot of those questions are going to be not answered for a while, because if it was super easy to answer those, then there'd be a bunch of $1 billion question or companies, right?
Yeah.
But still like keeping that in mind, and I think that's like one of the bigger contradictions that you kind of need to, not contradiction, but like two things you need to hold at the same time is like what's right in front of you in terms of what's your next feature, what are the things that you need to build right now, but also like what are you planning to do a long time in the future. So being able to kind of like, and a lot of times those two seem very different too, which is also kind of hard to wrap your head around. It's like, well,
Right.
why am I doing this feature if that's like not exactly what this 10-year vision is, right? And I don't know. It's trying to figure out that, I think moving forward is really difficult, because it can be, I think, a little easy to just kind of get caught up in what you're doing right in front of you and kind of forget about like what the longer term vision is, and as a result, sort of like get a little lost in terms of just building a little feature that someone asked here and a little feature here and whatever, and you kind of wind your way down until I don't know, you look up and a year's gone by and you don't really have
Right.
anything like amazing yet, right? So I think that's one
Right.
of our bigger challenges moving forward. It's like now we've gotten something initially that we've gotten some initial traction in terms of some people seem to really like it, but how are we going to get to like that next step? I guess so.
Right. Yeah, like how do you go beyond like a one I guess for lack of a better term, like a one trick pony? Like what's your future products and what's your product vision and what's your company vision, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely very important right now for us to figure out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I guess YC is probably a great place to help you with that as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It definitely helps to see a lot of like what other people's missions and visions are for their product in the future, to sort of see like, oh yeah, like that's really interesting. That's like a really interesting way of looking at it. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think it's great that you guys have like that customer base, at least that initial customer base established, and you have so much traction on product hunt and stuff. So man, best of luck. I think it's definitely, I'm looking forward to seeing what the future holds with Superpowered. And if anybody wants to check it out, I'll leave a link in the bio. I'll also leave a
Absolutely.
link for Nick, so you can talk with him if you want more information and I want to reach out. But
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Oh, I guess one thing that is that, yeah, if you guys want to, if anyone wants to reach out and talk to me about anything, if you're interested in what I'm doing in Superpower, just want to chat about anything, if you go to my website, nickyang.me, there's a link for like a coffee chat that you can book with me on Calendly.
Okay,
So yeah.
great. Yeah, I'll leave that. I'll leave that in the bio. But with that said, thank you so much, Nick, for coming onto the podcast. And guys, I know it was a quick one, but I definitely thought it was really great. But yeah, thank you so much, and take care. Till the next one.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you for having me.